where the sacred meets the secular, offering safe, grounded, practical, and responsible guidance for guides. This is the Psychedelic IQ Podcast. Many years ago, I was working with a client who said to me after our work together that the darkness will always rise up to meet the light. And as we put more light out into the world, the darkness will always rise up to meet it. And while I didn't completely understand it at the time, I definitely understand it now. As the deeper I have gone into my practice, the more darkness that I get to experience rising up to meet the light that we all put out into the world. And when I shared this concept with this first guest, she said to me, "You're right. The darkness is going to rise up to meet the light, but the light always wins. There's always just a little more light." And it's one of the reasons why I continue to work with and why I enjoy being friends with this first guest of the season. Christina Hunter has been a mentor of mine, and she has helped me enormously as I have transitioned my practice from being a little bit more of an enthusiast into a professional. Christina Hunter is a mindfulness-based somatic counselor, writer, and educator with a focus on psychedelic integration. With 20 years of experience studying transformative, expanded states of consciousness under teachers in both South America and the US, Kristina combines this knowledge with psychotherapeutic techniques and a deep grounding in Vajrayana Buddhism. Her work lies at the intersection of psychology, expanded states, and Buddhist contemplative practices, guided by the question, how can these paths help us become more awake and compassionate? Kristina also consults with clinicians on personalized approaches to psychedelic facilitation, emphasizing preparation, integration, ethics, and harm reduction. She serves as program coordinator and instructor for UC Berkeley's Psychedelic Facilitation Certificate Program at the Center for the Science of Psychedelics. Kristina is the co-author of Consciousness Medicine, published in 2019, and is currently working on a new book aimed at empowering seekers to approach psychedelic healing safely and thoughtfully. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Christina Hunter. Christina Hunter, thank you for joining us today on the Psychedelic IQ Podcast.
Thank you. Take 4, I think.
So before we get into that, I am going to ask that maybe you just share a little bit about who you are and what you do and kind of what brings you to this work.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here and have a conversation with you, GV. So I live up in Northern California, and I'm born and raised out here on the West Coast. And I got interested / obsessed with psychedelics and consciousness, also meditation, and all paths of what I would call waking up, becoming more awake, more activated at a very young age. Started exploring with myself and different medicines, and then down the line in my 20s, made my way down to South America and encountered indigenous and mestizo cultures, working with medicines in ceremonial context, and started doing some work and studying with different healers. And then just kind of fast forward to these last couple years, I've been working for the UC Berkeley Center for the Science of Psychedelics, Psychedelic Facilitation Certificate Program. And I'm the program coordinator for that. I'm also an instructor, do some teaching in that program. And then I also consult with folks doing, folks that are integrating work with expanded states into their work with clients, therapists, and different practitioners. And I'm also a writer, as I know you are as well.
Yeah, I think we'll get a little chance to chat about some book stuff a little later on in the conversation. Before we do that, I think that should be fun. I just want to warn everybody that who knows what's going to happen in the next hour to an hour and a half. The cuts of this podcast may be interesting. Kristina and I we recorded this the first time. Let's put it this way: we recorded this the first time probably over a month ago, and when we started that recording, I think the internet cut out on us twice. And 10 seconds into our first attempt at this today, it cut out again. So the universe is trying to tell us something. What do you think that it's trying to tell us? What is your, maybe what is your paradigm? How do you look at these sacred medicines? How do you look at healing from a really like esoteric perspective, or like, what is your worldview of this? And how does this influence what we're trying to do today?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big question, but as far as the internet cutting out, I gotta say, that just doesn't happen here because I have all my internet hardwired, and so it doesn't just stop working, but it has happened now multiple times. And so I was just sharing before we started recording, it's like, is this a sign that we're not supposed to continue? Or are there obstacles like, asking us to double down with, our determination to follow through and have our conversation? And I think it's a good question because these sorts of things happen all the time, but especially I find when we start, getting closer to the medicines or psychedelic experiences, where these phenomena kind of amplify unusual phenomena, and how do we interpret the signs? Is it telling us to not proceed? Or sometimes our signs are saying that, or are they just like testing us, right? Testing us to show up a little more and prove we want it, In this case, we're going with the latter, right? And if the internet fails again, we'll be back on. But this bigger question, the worldview that I bring to, I guess I'm hearing what you're saying as to healing and to healing work with psychedelic medicines. Yeah, I believe that the psychedelic medicines, the plant spirit medicines, but also the chemical, synthesized psychedelic medicines, well, they're all completely unique, and they're completely unique in how they affect the body and the relational field and the greater field. But something that many of them have in common is that they don't, not only amplify our psychology and what's going on emotionally, what's going on somatically, physically, but they also open, channels that I would call transpersonal, spiritual, energetic, things that are not of this material world. They open us to the invisible world, and that allows contact with beings and sentiences and energies that are not of this world. I would say not human. So that includes the living world of plants and animals and or other animals. But it goes beyond that. It's cosmic, And I think different medicines open those portals in different ways. But they open those portals. And I do hold a fundamental belief in that the fabric of the universe is made of loving awareness, and that's important because what that gives me is a trust that what opens, emotionally, psychologically, physically, and all the other ways in healing sessions, with the right intention and motivation of both the client and the facilitator, or if it's a ceremony, is in the direction of coming towards wholeness and healing. I don't think it's a random, cruel universe. So I hold that that's a big part of my worldview. And so there's something in Hakomi, which I know you've also studied, so have I, called organicity, trusting the organic unfolding of the organism to be moving towards wholeness. And that's kind of also the basic theory in holotropic breath work. There's a holotropic movement impulse. So I hold that, that all the natural world and us beings as part of the natural world are moving towards wholeness, but also evolution, expansion, getting to know ourselves, becoming larger versions of ourselves, knowing the infinite, layers of who we really are. And I think the psychedelic work just really can catalyze and support that process. That's not necessarily what's happening in a lot of, clinical trials or, settings that are out there, but it's it has vast potential that I bow to. So, yeah.
This is going to be a totally odd question that I wasn't planning to ask, but you said, I think your words were, the fabric of the universe is loving presence. Is there something to that effect?
Loving awareness.
Loving awareness. So if the fabric of the universe is in fact loving awareness, if we look at it, maybe I know that you have a more of a Buddhist tradition. I have more of an Advaita Vedanta tradition. We would call it Satchitananda, universal truth, existence, and the source of bliss. If that is in fact the case, what is your perspective on evil and negative entities and spirits when it comes to working in the psychedelic space?
For some reason, my Wi-Fi is working, so I usually am hardwired and there's no problem until today. But my Wi-Fi is working, so maybe the ghost is in the wires, and I'm just gonna transcend that shit and go on the Wi-Fi.
Okay. So what I'll do, I'm just gonna ask my question again, and then we can go from there. All right, okay. I'm gonna mark this clip.
If that happens again, we just keep pausing and restarting.
All right.
Right as you're asking about evil.
That's what it was not lost on me that this is what's happening.
My God.
All right. So you mentioned something in that last statement that the fabric of the universe is really loving awareness. And I think that maybe you're, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you sort of come from a Buddhist tradition. Maybe I come from more of an Advaita Vedanta tradition, but we would say that the substratum of everything is Satchitananda, universal existence and knowledge and bliss. So if in fact everything starts from love, what are your thoughts on evil or harmful entities that seem to arise, or at least be talked about, in the psychedelic space, or in many states of altered consciousness.
Yeah. So that's right, GB. Yeah, I come from Buddhist, but actually Tantric Buddhist. Vajrayana is what I've studied as a tradition, as well as Shiva Shakti Tantric tradition that really weave into Tantric Buddhism. And actually, the way I see it is that awareness, what we call awareness, what I call awareness, is it's not a fabric because it doesn't have a substance to it. It's a presence. But from awareness radiates love and compassion and joy and all these qualities. And, in this phenomenal realm, all the things that arise in the phenomenal realm, everything arises. So, beautiful, magical, auspicious, benevolent things arise, and so do confused, cruel, angry, lost phenomena, and that can take the form of people, and their thought forms and the way, all the way people treat one another, and then the way people internalize it and then treat others. And it also exists in the invisible realm, or I use that term to refer to things that that people that are more perceptive and sensitive can feel and perceive, but most of us can't see or touch. So, what we might call evil, or in other traditions you might call very dense ignorance, very densified aggression, desire, aversion, ignorance. These are like these three poisons in Buddhist philosophy. They exist in the sense of they appear, they arise, and just, if you go beneath desire, grasping, wanting things to be different, I want that, aversion, I don't want this, ignorance, I don't want to know about any of this. They all have this aggressive undertone to them. I want it to be different than it is. It's like coming into conflict with the way things are. And that can be so subtle, but it can be so dense, right? And that is, so dense to the point of like, I don't want these people living in my country and we're going to bomb them. That's as dense. I mean, it gets probably denser than that, but like that is the horrendous far end of the spectrum versus just like, I don't really want to read the news. I'm subtly avoiding what's happening on my planet. And though that tendency to withdraw, to have a little aggressive relationship or conflictual relationship, that arises, that's part of the way phenomena arises. So I think of evil as just somewhere on the spectrum there, I think the ultimate cure, remedy, way to break up evil is with love. Loving awareness is the strongest, can't call it a weapon, but it pierces it right in its heart. So that's the strongest medicine. But until someone really is able to recognize and rest in that and hold that tool, it's really good to have a lot of shamanic tools and ways of working with relative phenomena. Yeah.
What would you say if someone was having a big, powerful experience? Let's just use psilocybin for just general terms now. It can happen on almost any of these medicines, but let's say someone is having an experience with anger, like a lot of really old, unprocessed anger, maybe from like childhood abuse or something like that. If you were, like, from a training perspective, would you encourage a facilitator to approach that and say, well, just let the anger come out, let that client have that angry process? Or would you encourage that client to focus on like love and forgiveness and to try and shift the vibration of that experience?
I am a firm believer in that freedom, liberation come only via fully entering what is arising. So if someone is there having a really big angry thing and they're growling or yelling or stomping, hitting the floor, the way, how I would relate with that as a facilitator and how I would teach others to do so is you actually encourage it and let the medicine amplify it. And just to say, right, most people, at least in the culture you and I share, are very repressed with their strong emotions, including anger. So it's pretty, not everybody though, right? Some people need to learn how to repress a little bit more, but, or at least contain it. But if that's coming up and that's opening, that is wonderful, I think. And so to encourage that and, cheerlead it and, find the music that matches that energy. Or if you're playing music, it's a drum, it's like, energetically like, encourage that, to a point, and what I mean is there can come a point, is what I've seen, in especially in expanded states where, it's like, is this person expressing deep anger out of their own body, rage from their guts? That's great. That's good. But there can be this point where it's like, or is this like, to use a psychological term, like an interject? Or to use a shamanic term, is this like an entity? Is this like, is there something going on? Is this person just getting like racked, getting worked? And this is where it's like, the worldviews kind of, split, where it's like, you can just see it as okay, this is their cruel, abusive father who like got in them in a way. And that's understood in psychological theory. But sometimes it feels a lot different than that. And it's like, this feels like something like ancient and cruel and abusive. And yeah, maybe it was in dad, but it seems like it's older than that even. That's where it gets shamanic, and where it's like, all right, maybe it's time now not to try to bring in the love, but, to get kind of fierce with this energy. Love the person, guard the person, take care of the person. But like, I can speak from having been in many ayahuasca ceremonies and having witnessed or experienced similar things, where this is like the time when the shaman comes over and just like gets pretty fierce and is like singing a really strong ikaro. And you're feeling like, oh my God, it's like rattling this energy even more and more. And the intent, as I understand it, right, is to like basically banish this thing out of you by the shaman, the facilitator, being stronger than it and helping the client participant purge that thing, purge it out, clear it out, find their own strength. And finally relate with that instead of having it there kind of as a possession or negative influence, they can push it out. And so I guess, as far as love and compassion, like I think love and compassion, because they are in the field, once that density gets purged or cleared or broken up, the love and the beauty and the grace and the compassion, they flood in. We don't have to force that, So often it comes retrospectively, After we've purged out a big thing, then we find the love. It's been there all the time. We just didn't see it or feel it. Yeah.
recent experiences and the maestro that I study with, I would concur with everything that you just said, and just add that while the maestro, the shaman, whatever word you're going to use, curandero, oftentimes will be maybe the first level of defense, and to come up and to work with that, singing an ikaro, using whatever tools they have in their belt to try and remove that heavy, dense energy. And then when that doesn't work, so the people that I work with, they will call in all of their protection. They'll call in Dr. Ayahuasca, Dr. Wachuma, Dr. Tobacco, using other more powerful spirits, more powerful energy to move that. So yeah, I would absolutely agree. But I appreciate your perspective there. And I also agree that when we are sitting with an individual that is having a big, powerful experience, to shut that down and to not allow somebody to be angry, to not allow somebody to have a big, powerful experience is maybe doing, causing new harm. And that's one of the things that I tend to see, unfortunately, sort of what I call the love and light brigade, when spirituality is just like, oh, no anger, no fear here. It's all love and light. It's all abundance. And when people haven't done their own anger work and are not comfortable with their own anger, let alone somebody else's, then it's a big gap in the potential treatment options that facilitator can bring. Because when somebody else's anger brings up a bunch of their fear or their own anger, then now both people are in a hole with no ladder to get out.
Totally. And I think when a facilitator tries to either shut down a process or reassure it or assuage it, calm it, that's for them. That's because they're not comfortable with what's happening and they're feeling afraid or overwhelmed, that's why, it's super important for anyone who's a facilitator to have lots of experience and to have gone deep and gone wide in their own personal experience so that they've encountered and worked with various energies. We're not here to just dance with love and light. Like, we're here to meet all the energies in our human experience, and it's all complex. And so, to ultimately come to the place where how do we relate with that cruelty inside? Do we let it, work us, or do we say, you know what? No, I'm here for something else, and come into a better relationship, either banish it or put it in its place, repurpose those energies. But just to say, it does come back to, I think facilitators need to have a lot of experience. And also this question, which I don't know the answer to, but the fact that these medicines and the spaces that open with them are so shamanic, and I'm going to use that word, but to say they're so they're beyond this world. And if you don't have experience in those realms or a worldview to work with that, you're going to be flummoxed and not know what to do when things get really weird. And, when things, they go way beyond what fits your psychological framework. It's not about their childhood. It's way beyond that. So, how can people in the modern, what's happening, psychedelic people getting trained as psychedelic guides, how can they also learn that? Is that possible, to learn just that transpersonal way of holding it and working with things? That's a big learning curve, I think.
I'm going to come back to that, but I want to, if you imagine a pyramid, and at the base of that pyramid, maybe even at the base of that pyramid, we think of recreational use of psychedelics. Healing can happen in a recreational experience. And if we go a level up above that, we might imagine the medical model. So today, very frequently being thought of in the ketamine space, like come into a clinic, have a treatment of some kind. Maybe above that is the therapeutic model, where people are having some psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. And then maybe at the very point of that pyramid is a spiritual model. And or maybe a shamanic model, or whatever word we're using for this transpersonal definition. What do you think about the medical model and the psychological model using these medicines, but not having any shamanic framework, any transpersonal framework to address the content that comes up in those situations?
I think that it poses issue and problem for every level of this pyramid, because these things happen in recreational spaces. These transpersonal, shamanic, non-rational experiences happen in recreational settings. They happen in the ketamine clinics. I've talked to plenty of people who were doing their good, like ketamine infusions or sublingual lozenge ketamine sessions, and it's less common, but have encountered things that just blew their mind, and they tried to discuss with their, the prescribing doctor or the nurse that's sitting with them or their therapist, and that practitioner not knowing what to do with that. I don't know. Good luck. Maybe you need to find, I don't know, and so it happens there. It definitely happens in the therapeutic one-on-one or ceremonial contexts. And one area of ways that the psychedelic, medicines get used, you didn't mention, is like intentional, but unguided, like groups of friends. I guess you could call it recreational, but there can be an intention, there can be a setting that's prepared for
sincere use. I like to say.
Yeah, with intention and prayer. And like, I'm thinking back to when I was, had experiences like that when I was young, and like crazy stuff happened. Things that just, we didn't understand. And so it's like, yeah, what do you do with that? And then spiritual, well, yeah, I think actually people who are, I guess I keep coming back to the word shamanically trained, because what's another term for it? People who understand that there's this world and other dimensions, and there are bridges and portals connecting them all. That can be different worldviews. People can come at that slightly differently, like in Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, or more esoteric Chinese medicine and philosophy. They see it like that, but it's very different than like what your teachers in Peru, how they're seeing it, or how the tantrikas in the Himalaya are seeing it, but they see it, Some way of seeing reality like that makes, I think, a lot more, gives a lot more fluency for the phenomena and what opens with psychedelic medicines, the type of healing that occurs.
I think it was in The Way of the Shaman, and I'm going to mess up the quote, but in general, the author says a master shaman has the cosmology of the master shaman is so large that they have a place for everything. And I like that definition, because there's nothing fundamentally unexplainable to a master shaman. There's like, everything makes sense as long as you can step back far enough and look at the whole picture.
Totally. I love that. Yeah. Anything and everything and anything can arise and do arise.
Yeah.
And if you have a worldview that's large enough to hold that, that's a solid position to, but to truly have a view that can hold all of that. And, yeah.
So let's take that. Let's take that as one end of the pendulum, one side of the pendulum. And then let's take maybe a Western medical therapeutic approach and maybe put that at the other side of the pendulum. And because of your work at Berkeley with training, you are in a lot of ways responsible for bridging this gap, like for widening the cosmology of a lot of your students. So just tell me what it's like for you to be in the trainer seat, or program coordinator / trainer / person who has to somewhat decide on what people are going to learn. How has that experience been for you to create the program? And how are people that may not have had that view, a larger cosmology, how are they receiving some of that training from your perspective?
Yeah, really great question. Well, part of why I got involved in this program is because as it was coming together, the mission, the vision was to really create a training that was interdisciplinary and included the research and the clinical science and the psychotherapy, but also included what came to be called by one of our instructors of last year, Susanna Bustos, who's a dear friend and amazing teacher. She called ancestral entheogenic traditions. She's not using the word shamanic, but ancestral entheogenic traditions, looking at the teachings from these ancestral traditions that might be indigenous, but are often mestizo, right? They're syncretic. They have a thread of indigenous, tradition, but also, Catholicism can come in, or these other traditions. So they're syncretic, kind of mestizo traditions, but they, these traditions have been holding these medicines for thousands of years, and who are actually the wisdom keepers of how these medicines can work. So she was a big part of bringing in her experience and wisdom and influencing the program. And then, we bring in other pieces, spiritual care and ethics and diversity and equity, inclusion. These all weave together, but our team, the folks who've gathered to, put this training together, it wasn't, I don't know, so explicitly intentional, but we are people who carry a wide view, so we're all coming from different places, really. But, one of the wonderful teachers on our team is a medical doctor, but he's also someone who spent a lot of time in traditional ceremony with Native teachers. And it's just like in his bones. And our program director, she spent a lot of time in the Lakota tradition and sweat lodge and healing ceremony. So we all kind of bring that. So we don't make a big thing about it, but it's just kind of who we are and how we hold this work. And so that weaves into what we place priority on and what we think is important. And while also honoring that a lot of the people coming into this training and many of the trainings, right, they're a whole spectrum of people, but some of them are coming, from a more clinical, maybe medical background. We do try to screen or, find people in our admissions process who hold that larger view, because that's just how we see it. And the truth is, most people who've had some experience in expanded state psychedelic experiences, as whatever they thought they believed in before, after you have some big psychedelic experiences, you might not believe in spirits and entities, but you have an openness usually, like, okay, it's possible, So all I ask for is openness. You know, you don't have to believe, just have an openness and let's explore. But we have had some students who some of this was newer for them. But to tell you the truth, like what I've seen is most people are just, they're not resistant. They're actually very interested and want to learn more. And they actually want more of this than we teach, because we're still within a, you know, University of California. We're keeping it, you know, conventional enough and based in, you know, science and research and real, not just science and research, also living traditions that we very much value the gravity of living in, you know, healing traditions. And, you know, this is, you know, we're not going like far off into the, you know, the deep shamanic training of this work. I totally encourage people to go do that if, you know, that's a really good supplemental training that people need. It's more of an apprenticeship model than what you can teach in a classroom. But just overall, people want this. They're eager for it, especially if they've had experience, because they know that this is part of the landscape of working with psychedelic medicines.
There's a couple of things that I've learned over the last decade of doing my own work. One of them is that the fastest way to turn an atheist into an agnostic is to serve them a large dose of psychedelics. And another very interesting thing is one of the best ways to make pineapple taste amazing is to just take some sacred medicine.
Pineapple.
Nothing tastes better after an ayahuasca journey than pineapple.
That might be true. Yeah, a lot of fruits. Like you haven't really tasted a fruit. You think you have. You haven't tasted a fruit until the end of a ceremony.
You know what I'm talking about. You mentioned something about like shamanic indigenous apprenticeship, and I want to maybe make that address that in two questions, but there's really a couple of questions that I want to go higher up. So first of all, what is your kind of philosophy on training in that? Does maybe an underground guide, or does just a guide in general, somebody who wants to do this kind of work, do you think that they actually need training in psychotherapy?
Yeah, good question. I don't think someone needs training in, quote, psychotherapy. They don't need to be a licensed psychotherapist. There is a reason why I think it's good that people are licensed psychotherapists, which I can speak to. But overall, I don't think that's a requirement. I think that one does need, or it is incredibly helpful to be fluent in psychology as we see it. If you're working with people in the US, in the dominant culture, it is very helpful to understand psychology and the psychology of the people you're working with. If you're working in a different culture and context where this Western psychotherapy thing isn't a thing, you don't need it. I mean, it can be a helpful frame, but you need to, I think, understand the frameworks of healing that are already in the culture and that people are relating with, the books they've read, the way they're thinking about their own process. And so in this culture, my culture, that, there are many cultures in the United States, so I don't want to be universal about it, right? But like, I'm a European descendant person who's spent time in the educational system and academia and science and, this way of thinking. I think it's really helpful. What's most helpful is, I think, understanding transference, these aspects of psychodynamics, of transference and countertransference, and what they call enactments and projection and projective identification. If you don't know what that is, it's really good to learn. Projection, projective identification, and these things that can arise in the relationship, in the field of relationship that the field of psychology has really studied and has some really helpful, information about, as well as, this being in the seat of a facilitator, learning those skills that a therapist learns of centering the client, of attunement, of bringing that loving attention, of really knowing, being confident enough and to inquire and learn about someone's background and history and understand the impacts of things like neglect and abuse and addiction, growing up in a family of addiction. That's really helpful. And that's in the realm of therapy, also kind of medical medicine. But the thing is, right, it's like in this work, it's so multidimensional that it's like, yes, it's really good to know that. And it's really good to understand the physical body and medical contraindications. It's also really good to understand these shamanic phenomena we're talking about. And, it's like the more you study, the more you're just going to have lenses, ways of seeing what's arising. But psychology is super helpful for sure.
Let's flip that question on its head then. And let's look now at someone with formal psychology training that may be coming to this work saying, well, if you just teach me how to dose, then I'll be good. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I think that comes to like learning how to dose is good, having all that psychological training, great. But how you be with someone who's in an expanded state of consciousness, unless if someone has studied like hypnotherapy and they've learned how to be with people in what you could call trance states, altered states. Hakomi, why I think it's great is because the work is all about bringing the client into this state of mindfulness, this inner state, which is very much an expanded state of consciousness. And then working with them there, you learn how to kind of help them go in, help them come out, have enough time to integrate and, come back to feet on the ground at the end of the session. That's just an hour session. But so there are these ways of working with people or that you learn how to kind of be more fluid in different states of consciousness. That's what's important. So if someone's coming just, I think CBT is great and it has its place in the world of healing work. But if that's all you're coming with, kind of very materialist view of the brain and behavior, and you're really working with people in one state of consciousness, one primary state, then that's not enough. It's not enough. So there's that. But there's a lot more. There's a lot more. I mean, I guess one other piece I'd say is, well, there's the obvious piece we've just been talking a lot about, working with phenomena that isn't rational, reasonable, materialist, knowing how to relate with that kind of stuff. Knowing how the body. I mean, that's another whole piece is people have lots of somatic physical phenomena unfold in psychedelic sessions. And, so it's really helpful to have some understanding of somatic awareness and the body and, kind of supporting people with unwinding things or purging things or opening things in their bodies. So that can look like training in body work, or like the kind of work I've studied is called continuum with one of my teachers, which is kind of a very subtle body work approach, but some deep dive into like the flesh and the bones and the fluids and the organs and the heart and the nervous system. That's really helpful. And a lot of psychologists, therapists don't have that. They're really just working in that psychological model. A lot of them do too, but I think that's important. And I really think it's an interdisciplinary type of work. And one needs to have studied from various angles to really be, most fluent and supportive for clients that are going on psychedelic journeys. Yeah.
Sidebar question. What are your perspectives, or how do you approach this in your training about touch and body work in session?
Yeah, well, the way in the Berkeley training we approach it, we're approved by Oregon. So our graduates who, once they complete their practicum and they get their certificate, they can go to Oregon and apply to be a licensed facilitator. So we follow the Oregon rules on touch, which are very minimal. You can touch, according to those rules, the hands, the shoulders, and the feet. And that's all. Supportive touch. And to do that, you need primary consent before the session, and then you get secondary consent in the session. Would you like me to hold your hand? Would that be okay now? Even if they've already told you yes. So there's those 2 layers of consent. So, I think for most people who are just coming into this type of work, that's really good to start there. Like, it's in this work, I think overall, it's better to do nothing. Like, the less you do, the better. Don't do something until you really know what you're doing. It's the overdoing and the too much doing that cause a lot more damage. You don't touch someone's chest or tummy or head if you aren't trained in that and know exactly what you're doing. Even if you're a massage therapist or a body worker, if you haven't been trained in working with people in expanded states, touching them in these more vulnerable, delicate places, just don't do it, and have them touch themselves, But if you've worked with someone who's trained you deeply in working with the, abdomen and stuck energies in there in expanded states, like that's a very rarefied training, but people do that. If you've really been trained in that, cool, but being very minimal with touch is how I hold it. And I think someone just has to be very experienced personally and trained in touch work before they were to involve anything else of touch. But I think there's way too much touch actually in psychedelic work, personally.
I think of 2 phrases that I think both of them were introduced from you to me. I know that one of them is Kylia's, but Kylia Taylor says, who is this for? And making sure that I'm touching, if I engage in anything, whether it's a phrase, whether it's touch, whatever, like, am I doing this for my client? Am I doing this for me? That's one that comes to mind. And then we had a conversation a couple of years ago. I think we were actually talking about the 2 MAPS facilitators up in Canada that sort of had some issues, definitely had issues, not sort of, be really explicit. But one of the phrases that came up in our conversation at that time was leave no residue. And it's such a simple phrase that has stuck with me for so long, that whatever I do, whatever I say, in some ways, whatever I think, like, I don't want to have a client leave an experience, holotropic breath work, psychedelics, whatever, and carry any piece of me with them. Even if it's an amazing healing experience, maybe they got some profound healing. But the minute that client attributes any of that healing back to me as the facilitator, the shaman, the curandero, whoever it is that we're talking about, then something is sort of off balance. I think we always want to try and leave as much of that authority and responsibility onto the client as we can.
Yeah, I love that. The leaving no residue. The essence of that to me is that in healing work, I believe this is, so we'll just say it specifically in psychedelic healing work, and a lot of healing work, like it's about fully centering the client or the participant. Yes, healing happens relationally for sure, but to fully center them means whatever you do, it's for them. And to really question your impulses continually, like that question Kylea has, and this is Kylea Taylor, who wrote The Ethics of Caring and who's been a guest teacher at our Berkeley training. Who's this for? That's a question we continually can ask ourselves, For example, if you have a client lying there who is in a deep grief process, crying, and you are there with them, and then you grab the Kleenex and you push the Kleenex towards them. And that can go a couple ways. That can be like, yeah, they had snot falling out of their nose and they're like, oh my God, thank you so much. And they take that Kleenex and it's like just part of the process. But it can also interrupt, if they're in a very vulnerable space and then now there's this Kleenex in their face and they're like, oh my God, am I making too much of a scene? She's telling me to clean myself up, okay. And then they kind of pull it together and stop the tears and take the Kleenex. Every little move in a psychedelic session matters and has impact. So to really sit with that question before you push that Kleenex, who's this for? Are they covered in snot and like putting their hand out like they need Kleenex? Or are they doing just fine? And you have issue with the messiness of their experience. Who's this for? But centering the client, I think the residue, right? It's when we start making it about us or we get tangled up in there that it leaves a residue. And then the client has to unpack what's theirs and what's ours. And was that really mine? Or was that actually just theirs? Then they have to manage that. So.
And the client might not have the awareness to even ask the question, was that mine or was that theirs? Was that mine or was that the facilitator's? The client is likely going to immediately take on that responsibility because that's what a lot of humans do, myself included. It's never the person in authority's fault. They were just doing what they were trained to do. They were giving me a Kleenex and now I've taken on all of this responsibility. And so I think it is very important for us as facilitators. You said the words, every little move in a psychedelic session matters. And I just want to, if I could put that on a billboard outside of every medicalized ketamine clinic, I would love to do that. Because I think that there are not everybody, and I'm not going to slam every single person serving ketamine today, but I have sat with multiple of my clients that have gone into ketamine centers that are being worked with medical doctors who have this experience of putting somebody under anesthesia, either with ketamine or with a general anesthetic, and then thinking that there's no consciousness there. And I can remember the first time that I ever went into one of those ketamine centers, and the client was under a full flood dose of ketamine, and a nurse came into the room, opened the door. First of all, the lights were all on. There was a giant TV right in front of them that was playing some nature documentary. So when I walked in, I turned the lights off. We turned the TV off. They started the session. And 2 or 3 times in the middle of the session, a nurse came in and grabbed a pillow or a blanket out of a closet and then shut the door. And I think there's such lack of awareness in the medicalized model today of how much every tiny little movement and sound and click and pop and shift in the chair, and they had a blood pressure cuff on that would tighten up and then it would beep and release. Like the whole thing just was so horrible to me. So if you're one of those doctors that are listening to this podcast, which you're probably not, but just in case, please come and sit in a real ceremony somewhere and have a real experience so you can get a taste of what you're putting people through.
Absolutely. And, it's big topic here, but, I think that's one of the many problems of the medicalization, and the clinical approach to these medicines is that the medical model is a capitalist model, and money, profit is the bottom line. And so people are overworked, under-resourced, stressed a lot of times if they're working in hospitals anyways, or clinics. And that makes people numb, kind of dense. They just got to get through the day. So they're just moving around all clunky and loud and got to get it done. It's just a thing to get done. Give the patient the ketamine, hook them up, make sure they're, it's just like so kind of survival level. And yeah, it's an assault on the nervous system. And if you haven't had these experiences, you don't know what that's like. But I want to follow your plea to the doctors and say, if you're a client or a patient in any setting, and you're in a setting where they're blaring the lights, where there's a TV on, where they're treating you in a rushed way, like just a patient coming in to get this or that, if you're being treated like that, or you're in that kind of environment, you're getting a really subpar experience. And if you're having a bad time, that's a big part of why it is, if not the main reason, because setting matters. Every little influence matters. And with these medicines, including ketamine, we go into these very young spaces, vulnerable. I don't want to say young, but very primordial, precious, like we're a baby again, we could say, where our defenses are down, our normal filters are down, everything matters and has impact. And so we want beautiful, warm, cozy, loving spaces with people that move slow and carefully and are very mindful of their movements. I mean, it's not just it's not just moving the chair gruffly or saying something. I'm going to take it farther. It's what people are thinking about in the room.
Absolutely.
It's like, it's so subtle. I've heard of people in clinical trials, sitting for people in clinical trials. The person has their blindfold on, their headphones. And the trial therapist is on their phone scrolling. Oh, they can't see me or hear me. I'm just scrolling. I'm just passing the hours. No, they can't see you, but they can feel that. You have Instagram in the psychedelic field right now. That's influencing them, but they don't know that, it just creates static and confusion. So yeah, every little thing matters. And I just hope people really advocate for themselves and find the thoughtful, considered settings for their experiences and fight for them. That's what you deserve.
I'm going to circle back to one of your terms, field phenomena, in just a moment. But before we switch to that, I want to just maybe punctuate this training conversation or this line of questioning with your thoughts on apprenticeship. We sort of talked about maybe a guide, whether or not they needed therapeutic training, what kind of training therapists need. How does the apprenticeship, maybe the traditional apprenticeship model, parallel with the concept of what you're doing at Berkeley today, or what's happening in Europa with these large cohorts of people that are really doing sometimes just online training, 1 year online every 2 weeks. You're getting a little piece of information, and sometimes there's practicums and sometimes there's not. What is your thoughts? How does the apprenticeship model need to be addressed?
Yeah. I think these large scale trainings like CIIS, Naropa, and then our training at UC Berkeley, these trainings are responding to what has seemed like the way the tide was going, which was state level decriminalization or therapeutic guidelines being released, these medicines becoming more widely available, like what's happened in Oregon and Colorado. It seemed like it might have been happening in California, but that just got stopped this past, in the last couple months, last month here. Although it'll probably be on the ballot, and we'll see if it passes in California and what specifically that certain plant medicines are made available for therapeutic use. Seemed like, and it's not just seeming, like this is on the rise, right? There's all these states that are moving this through, making these certain medicines more available. And then what was anticipated to happen with MDMA being rescheduled and made available widely by prescription. Seems like that might not happen. We'll see what happens in August of 2024 here. But so these trainings are training facilitators, to meet the demand. There's such a great demand out there. People with PTSD, people with depression who have tried many things or everything, and they really want to try psychedelics. The people with depression want to try psilocybin and see if that can just help the depression that they're struggling with. It does so much more, but can it just help with that, And then folks, the people that suffer with PTSD, can the MDMA help them? So if there's this great need and it's being made available, there is a great need for facilitators. Are they all going to be the most nuanced, highly experienced, sophisticated, fine maestro practitioner? No. That takes years. That takes apprenticeship. But what we can do is have people out there who are already trained, doctors, nurses, therapists, clergy, or people who carry a traditional lineage of training. We can have these people who have learned enough basics, fundamentals that they're not going to cause harm out there. It's a lot less likely they're going to cause harm. And if they've made, and I think what CIIS is doing in Naropa and our training is bringing in really good people and people with heart, people who are able to not just teach and give presentations, but to transmit something to these students. It's hard for me to imagine that happening with 100 people online, but I don't know. I've had some pretty amazing transmissions online from teachers, so they're getting something, and so then when they go out there, there's a basic knowledge base and they know what not to do. And maybe most importantly, I think what these large scale trainings are doing is creating community. They're creating community amongst people who are already clinicians, practitioners who are passionate about psychedelics and the healing. And they're weaving them together. That's what we've seen in our training is they're all coming from different disciplines. They're weaving together and they're creating this network of support. And they can lean on each other, and educate each other and support each other and optimally, ideally keep learning together, furthering their education. We really encourage that in the training I work for. But the truth is to become a really, effective facilitator in psychedelic work, that's a matter of apprenticeship. That looks like doing a lot of your own work and never stopping, and sitting by the side of someone who's been doing the work for as experienced or seasoned of a person you can find. Well, they might not want you to just be there sitting with them. You're very lucky if you can develop a relationship with someone who's happy to actually have you be there as an assistant. Everyone has the dream of that, but you have to work your way there. And the way you earn your way there is by sitting as the client again and again and again and again. And eventually they might invite you to come assist or sit by their side. But even just as a client, you're learning so much. That is really apprenticeship. It is training when you're sitting there with your own experience year after year after year. And yeah, that is how you really, I think, in my opinion, really become a fine, sophisticated, very deeply fluent facilitator, supporter, person who can help people, not just in the journey itself, but through that preparation, in that journey, expanded state experience, and then through the integration process and re-entry phase. It's through doing it yourself and sitting with someone who's been doing it for ideally decades.
Yeah, I totally agree. Some of the most learning that I have done has been sitting in other maestro ceremonies and just seeing how they operate, seeing how they hold space. Seeing, this is a question that we were going to talk about, holding space and this idea of the field phenomena. So I do want your opinions on this, but really being able to just see other people work, and to know that there's a lot of times when the best way that I can serve is to do my own work.
Yeah. And that just to say, that more traditional, maybe indigenous traditional way of teaching, it's not explaining things like, and then you do this and you do that. And then it's not like that. You watch and you observe and you listen and you receive the transmission and you embody it over time. They don't explain things to you. That is so Western. I don't know. It's just like.
I didn't realize this. I'd been going to Peru for, 7 years. And I finally found the maestro that I wanted to work with, and had been, it's the second or third time I had been in Peru with them. And we were walking to these sacred sites and they were explaining the sacred sites. And I started to realize that it was that, like, the transmissions were, I was getting them outside of the medicine, but it wasn't telling me how to serve the medicine. It was education outside of a ceremony that was coming through a transmission while we were at a temple, while we were at a sacred site. And it wasn't like, this is how to do this. It was, this is a way of being. And the way of being, when you can be in a specific way, there is less doing required. So
Exactly. Right. I would say the deepest teachings I've received, like I'm just thinking of one of my meditation teachers, one of my lamas, I attended many, many teachings with him, but some of the deepest teachings I received from him were drinking tea together, eating a meal together, watching how he drinks his tea was just like, oh my, that's how you drink tea. And that's the awakened, or, it's just like, it all came through right there. There's a whole thing in that in Buddhism of teaching through it's, through the gesture, through the symbolism of the movement. It's not oral teaching, transmission teaching. But yeah, I think with medicine, that's where the bulk of it is, actually.
Yeah. Let's shift maybe to our sort of final gear here and talk a little bit about rupture and repair. And maybe if you just want to touch on this idea of the field phenomena, you talked about somebody scrolling through Instagram and the experience that a client can have with that subtle of a thought form and a shift in consciousness. Maybe just start at the field level and how easy it is for a facilitator to maybe even unintentionally cause harm.
Yeah. Well, so the premise that the field is, when I say the field, okay, I'm talking about like this, if you're indoors, if you're in your space, in that space, maybe around it a little bit, it's different. I call it it's just, there's something else going on. If one person is expanded with a medicine, with a psychedelic medicine, that field shifts. And yes, like we've talked about, every little thing is amplified, but it's like the the living psyche that normally has a container around it, like, oh, I'm imagining something in my own head or my own psyche right here, those boundaries dissolve, and like what I'm imagining goes beyond and into the whole room. We're co-imagining together. It's like the psychic field expands. And so those boundaries dissolve. So yeah, if you're there on your social media, like obsessing, like that's in the psychic field, and someone who's really open and sensitive is being impacted by that. Maybe not necessarily negatively, but they're being impacted by that. And then the opposite is true. Or, if you're in there and you're a practitioner, you're a meditator who's just resting in open awareness, or maybe you're doing your mala, your mantra, and you're doing some really powerful mantra for healing, that also has an effect. And, so it can go both ways. So then getting into what we've kind of talked about, this thing of like rupture, repair, I want to say it's not about being perfect. Okay. Like if it's a super expanded, sensitive field, like it's not about sitting in the corner with holding our breath, like don't have any thoughts, that's just not real life. It's like things are happening. We're having the thoughts we're having. There's a reason why this person came to you, and you're in maybe the midst of a process in your life. You have to also trust that. And maybe you are kind of processing it really cognitively, or even just subtly while you're in the space with the client in their journey. So trusting that it's all part of, the ceremony, whatever's happening is happening. But like, it's not about being perfect. We're all just humans doing our human thing. And so what can happen, right? This is because everything's amplified, the littlest things that can happen in that space can be interpreted or can land in a hurtful way or harmful way for someone. So I've given you like this example of being a facilitator with a client, and you go to the bathroom, and that's a very, maybe you tell them, hey, I'm going to go use the bathroom, be right back. And you go use the bathroom, and maybe you're in there for a totally normal amount of time. But for the client, it feels like an eternity. And after the first minute, which has felt like maybe an hour for them, they go into this deep material around childhood neglect and having been abandoned, and all the emotional pain that they've been carrying, maybe consciously or not, for 30 years or whatever. And you come back from, maybe it's been like, 5 minutes or something, and they are like angry at you, they feel abandoned by you, and they're pissed off. And these sorts of things happen all the time. Have you ever had anything like this happen, GB?
Yes, not a bathroom thing, but I said one comment to an individual after a medicine journey. Client had worked with me prior and had a very positive, powerful experience, and had come in and said, I want to have a even more powerful experience. I want to do a larger dose of medicine. And that's what we did. Like there was all this 100% consent going in. And the client had a really, really challenging experience, to the point where like the ancient protective parts sort of came online very early. And never really dropped into a psychedelic experience of any kind. It was just hard. It was just physically uncomfortable, and they were disoriented and dizzy and blech. And at the end, they had a lot of questions. Like they wanted to know why it didn't work and what was different and all the things. And in that moment, and this was early on in my work, and I just said to them, well, you just didn't let the medicine work. And while I, even saying this out loud today, while I still actually believe there is a thread of truth in that statement, I also didn't realize how much blame they were taking on from my statement, that like they felt they had done something wrong. And what I didn't realize for over 3 months was that they were carrying around this shame that they had done something wrong. And it was by this, like, seemingly, for me, a seemingly innocuous comment. And once I finally had a conversation with them and they shared this with me, thankfully, they were willing to share it with me. But that was the opportunity for us to do some repair work. And it also taught me a really big lesson about how important a single phrase can be. Just a single sentence can have so much weight, not only when we're out of ceremony as having a power dynamic of a facilitator, but also having even greater, exponentially greater power dynamic when somebody is under the influence of a psychedelic. How much more open we are, and when it can trigger this tiny little thing, then just grows and grows and grows. So fortunately, I had an opportunity to on both sides, the rupture and the repair side, but it was a lot easier to do harm than I ever expected.
Totally. And that's so wonderful that you got to have some repair with this client. And but just to test that a little bit, like, and I think it's a good example, is like, how do you know, GV, that the medicine wasn't working?
Today, I can trust that the medicine was doing exactly what it needed to do, that individual was having the exact experience that they were supposed to have. And like I said, I think this is probably 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when I thought that I was responsible for an outcome. As the facilitator, I was the person that was somehow had some larger part to play in the experience than I should have. Yeah. And today, thank God for my teachers, supervisors, therapists, the maestro that I study with, that today I know, like, it was just the way it was supposed to be.
Exactly. And I think it's like, so therein is the field phenomena. If we are part of the field and we're in that space, even if we haven't consumed anything as a facilitator, but we're in that psychic field, the medicine is working. And the way the medicine works sometimes is that the person has a really hard time, or they're just in that resistance, and we could call it a protector is really just engaged. Making a comment like that, whereas I can empathize with that, it's, you are essentially saying you did it wrong, right? We're saying that to someone, you've done it wrong, or could have been better, or, and there's a whole lot going on there, right? Because that probably, and maybe that's even part of the whole thing unfolding too, right? And so they're going back to the point of, like, it's not about doing it perfectly. We say weird things. Our own material gets triggered. We get activated. We say the thing that, oh my God, totally, like, drives it even deeper for the person. They feel even more wounded and neglected. We come back from the bathroom and they say, oh my God, where were you? And you're like, oh, come on. I was only out of there for 5. You diminish it, or like, come on. And that just makes them more angry and neglected, because that's exactly what their father did. Every time they pointed something out, they got dismissed and diminished. So there's where you're in some projective identification and an enactment. If you don't know what those things are, look them up, because it's really important to this work. But if you do something like, if those little things happen, which they will, then the possibility is to have repair. It's not about being perfect. It's about being loving and responsive and staying relational and being willing to talk through the things that happen. It's not about, this is one of my like little words I live by that for myself. It's not about being right. It's about the relationship. You can have one or the other. You can be right, or you can have a relationship. So as someone who likes being right, I often have to just like bow to that and let it go and choose relationship, because I don't want to be right and like alone with no friends. I want to have a family and community. And so that's about, what was my reality? What's your reality? Let's just talk about it. Let's not figure out the right thing. Let's talk about it. So I could say a little bit about repair if you want.
Yeah. What is it like when it happens?
Yeah.
As a facilitator, what do I do? What do I do to approach this in a healthy, conscious, authentic way that doesn't cause more harm?
Yeah. The important thing is, one important thing is, if you're triggered, if you're activated, and we have to cultivate the capacity to track that, the heart rate, the tension in our body, the slight aggression that we get when we're a little activated. If there's any of that, it's better to do nothing and just stay spacious, bite your tongue, just observe, okay, take it in. Yeah, you felt neglected. You thought I was gone too long. Okay, thank you for sharing that with me. And if you're just, you're really stirred up inside, just stop, contain it, wait it out, complete that session. Maybe even let it go, if you can, and then revisit it afterwards. That's super important for yourself, to revisit whatever got kicked up in that exchange with someone, whoever it is, but we're talking about with a client in a psychedelic session. What got kicked up for you? Oh, I hate being controlled and being told that I take too long. I don't like people, I want to go to the bathroom as long as I want. Like, this is my life. And whatever that is that got kicked up, you need to work with that and unpack it. And that's about you. That's your stuff. So whether that's with your consultant, supervisor, therapist, friend, peer consultation group, work it out. Get to the place where you have diffused the charge and you're able to separate your stuff from your client's stuff. Because again, we're talking about centering the client. It's not about you. You need to have layers of support in your life to work out your stuff. If you don't, you shouldn't be doing this work. But then when you're ready to return to being with the client, it's about the client's experience. It's relational, but again, the attitude we want to bring most is curiosity. So I want to circle back to that thing that happened during the session when I went to the bathroom. And I want to know what that was like for you. Don't go into apologizing. Like, just be curious. Tell me what that was like for you. And if you've created enough safety in that relationship and invitation and permission that they're able to say, well, as soon as you left, it's like I was 3 years old again, and there I was. And it was that thing where, like I've told you, my parents they forgot about me and didn't pick me up after school. And whatever the story is, it's going to unfold there. My mom would leave to go to the store and she wouldn't come back for 3 hours. These are real things that people experience in their childhood that leave these huge, painful impacts. If you make enough safety and you say, tell me more, and how was it for you? How was it for you back then? But also, how was it for you with you and me, And they tell you, that's really wonderful. They've just shared something really tender. Now you have a choice point as a facilitator. You make it all about the history and the past, and that's what a lot of people do. Okay, so this is really about your childhood and your mom, and let's talk all about that, and let's not even bother with the thing that kicked it up. That's where a lot of people go. But it's not complete, because this thing actually really did happen last week between you two, and mom might be dead or unavailable. Where their healing is possible is between you and the client. And so you have this potential right there. Maybe you hear the whole story and then you say, so now let's talk about what happened in the session. I just want to say, like what happened there is I had to take care of my own needs and use the restroom. And I, if there's anything else you can share, like if you really were in there for a long time, then share it. I was in there a little long because my tummy's a little upset and I just needed a little more time, or, I just needed a little settling time with myself before returning to you. Whatever the truth is, just be transparent and share it. And then that's where we can apologize, and I'm sorry for the impact that you felt neglected there, that you were feeling neglected. Like, that's not my intention ever, but I totally hear that impact. And I'm really grateful that you shared that with me. It's not about apologizing, oh, I should never do that again, but just like, wow, causing harm is not what what I'm here to do, so I'm sorry for the impact of that. And maybe next time, maybe we talk a little bit more about that before we do another session, about how you're going to be with yourself while I'm out of the room. And maybe that's something we unpack and we return to a little bit more. Usually when most people are vulnerable, right, and the clients shared their history, and then the practitioner or the facilitator shares a little bit more about what was going on for them, even if it was kind of nothing, but they just come with curiosity, like, then usually out of that repair emerges. There's reconnection, there's rebonding. Both people are being open about their truth. And that no one's being defensive, usually it just kind of, it comes to completion. It clears. And it's not enough to just apologize. A key part is reflecting on what all was going on for you, because usually when it comes up in a relationship, there is something going on for you. Usually there is. You really were in the bathroom a little long, or there was something you weren't telling them, that you had an upset stomach and you kept leaving. Like, often there is something, and you just be transparent and share about what was going on. And then their system settles. Oh, it's not that they were neglecting you. They're just dealing with an upset stomach. And, so that's kind of the basic of it. And the more that there are ruptures and they are returned to with the care of repair, the stronger the bond builds. That's the secure attachment that builds to the point where more things can happen and they don't land as any kind of hurt or rupture. It's like there's trust in the relationship. Like, I know that if my guide leaves the room and they're gone, they're doing something they need to do, because we've talked this through. I know they're good at taking care of themselves. I know they care about me. So I'm not taking this personally. It's okay. We can float it. We're resilient in relationship. But that has to be built. We don't usually have that right off the bat. And that happens through these little fractures, these ruptures, and the way we respond to them. So
what do you think about, let's say this bathroom example happens, and you as a facilitator walk back into the room, client brings up some anger, and you as a facilitator are capable, you're not triggered, there's no big reaction there. Do you have a preference on when to do this repair work? Is it okay to do the repair work while a client is still in the medicine? Or is it better to wait till the medicine's kind of done and talk about it after. And yeah.
It's a choice point because, say you heard something and the client didn't, and it's someone knocking on the door and you heard it and you're like, I'll be right back, and you go out and it's a neighbor and like the cat's got hit by a car, or like God knows what, and you have to actually be there for more minutes than you would have preferred to be gone, and then you come back and then this thing shows up and they're like, oh my God, where were you? That was so long. I think it's totally fine to say, you know what, it was my neighbor and just there was something going on outside I had to attend to. I am sorry. I'm sorry about that. I just had to go take care of that. Usually that's just going to settle for someone. Oh, okay. If it's a bigger, more complicated thing, then I think it's good to just apologize. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. But also be curious. Tell me a little more. What's coming up for you? It depends what medicine you're working on, right? Like ketamine, MDMA, yeah, conversation. If it's something like LSD or psilocybin, not a huge value in going into some deep process conversation. So it's like, okay, thanks for sharing with me. Well, I'm here now. So go back into your session. I'm here, reestablish the connection and the trust. And then sometimes these things just disappear and you don't need to return to them. But sometimes they bring it back up, later, or you feel it. It's a felt thing. You feel that there's something, the bond, the rapport is just has a little static. And even if it's not about that thing, use anything you can, like try it out. Hey, I wonder if when I left and I was gone for a few minutes, how that was for you. They might say, oh my God, I've been thinking about it. I just felt silly for mentioning it, but I've been feeling like, what the hell? Where did you go? Thus, you have a conversation right there. And I just want to say, I've seen a lot of therapeutic relationships, but especially relationships between guides and clients deteriorate because these little sorts of things happen, and the guide wasn't able to slow down enough to have this conversation. But the main mistake I've seen people do is they make it about the client's history and past. And they say, you're just projecting on me. It's not about me. It's about your mom, your dad, you're this, you're that. It's not about me. And that just feels icky because it's like, actually it is about you. Like, I'm here with you talking about it and the thing really happened. It's about you. Like, this thing of trying to it's between you and the medicine and your history. No, it's not. You're in the field with them. Your relationship is part of the healing, the healing phenomena that's happening. So if you're committed to healing with people, then, you kind of it's like offering your body to science. You're offering your sense of self for the healing, and come with humility and curiosity and a willingness to get dreamed up and whatever's going on, keep your anchor in love and care and clarity and awakeness and curiosity, and navigate from there, and everything is workable, I think. Well, almost everything is workable.
And what I hear there is it's both and. In a lot of cases, it is about what mom or dad did in the past. And as the facilitator, you're now, whether you want to, whether you like it or not, you are now stepping into this role and you're playing the part. You're playing another part in this unfolding psychodrama. And for you to abandon your part is like you walking off the stage saying, I'm taking a coffee break, or like, I don't want to perform today. When in fact, the show must go on. Like, the client is in the middle of the show. And for us to just abandon our responsibility there is really is really not honoring the reason why we showed up to do the work. The last thing that you said there is something that I've been really playing with, is that we have these substances. And I think if we're looking at them from the medicalized model, we think of them as a molecule. And whereas the indigenous ancient lineages think of them more as a medicine. But we have the substance, and then we have, in this case, I'm going to use the word curandero very specifically, like a healer. And it is the overlap. If we think of them as a Venn diagram, as the substance and the individual serving the substance, in the center is the medicine. It's a combination of both of those energies that come together that create this experience that change the field. That's the medicine. That is my medicine. When it is a combination of me and the client and the music and the substance all coming together to create this alchemy of healing. And if we don't take responsibility for all of it, then we're missing the boat somewhere.
Yeah, totally. It's like, someone takes the medicine to connect with their medicine, but to be open to greater medicine. What does it mean, right? It's, to let these things that are dense and old and wounded and hurt or outdated arise to the surface, get worked through and worked out, to clear, to lighten us up. I mean, that's one of the things that happens in the medicine field, to also receive blessings and power and energy and guidance and vision. And yes, so, as a facilitator, I love what you were just saying. It's like, I think this is true in all of life. Like, life is a theater. Life is like theater. You have a role to play. You don't want to shirk your role, but you also don't want to take your role too seriously, right? Like, don't think you are the role. You're playing a role. And similar, I think a medicine, psychedelic session, journey, ceremony, it's like amplified theater, psychodrama theater, right? And there's container and rules and protocol, kind of a rhythm to it, a ritual to it, and all this stuff is amplified. So so here we are in this theater. So as the facilitator, you have a role, and don't try to back out of your role. It's not going to go well. Don't take your role too seriously either. You're just there to play your role. And it might be about healing some old, familial thing or something bigger than that. They might not need anything from you at all. You might just be sitting there, keeping them safe and keeping them warm and giving them the water. And there's none of this stuff arising. They don't need that from you. That's beautiful. Just take your role there, be the guardian, be simple, be simple, beautiful. Be curious, be responsive, be in your belly.
Don't sleep with your clients.
Definitely don't do that. Yeah. Don't do that, people. It's just, it's bad for everyone. And then,
we can't, it's been said on this podcast more than once, and it can't be said enough. Just don't sleep with your clients.
Yeah. And to say to that, like, why, because there's probably people that are like, but why? You're in the role of sacred guardian. You're like in a parental role, you have a sacred job to do, to protect, to allow someone to go into their deep, innocent childhood states, and you cross that line and it just messes everything up. It's not just like ethically terrible idea. It's like, it also messes with the whole psychic process. And, it's just very messy and irresponsible. And that's where you're not actually taking your role as sacred guardian seriously. So.
Yeah. Well, the last question that I want to ask you, I know that we're both working on books.
Yeah.
And I would, if you're interested, I would love to know, like, how would you describe the book that you're writing in a few sentences?
Yeah. Well, I co-wrote this book that came out in 2019 that was geared a little more towards practitioners and working with expanded states. This one, what I'm working on now, is something for people seeking the work. Um, and so what's behind it is to educate and empower folks who are curious and seeking psychedelic work to really be oriented and have a framework and I'm holding it really open. Like, I thought it'd be just about guided work, but it's like, I celebrate people that do recreational work at recreational psychedelics. I'm not against that. I think it's beautiful, but I wish for people to do it really safely, so that they can get the benefit of the beauty that can come from recreational experiences. So I guess there's a part of harm reduction in there, like, how do you do the thing but stay safe and well, but also like get the most out of it. I'm interested in that. How do you really like get the juice, the transformation, the growth. So yeah, it's for seekers, and working on it now, and hopefully by next year would be awesome that it would come out. So yeah, but just trying to take great care with it, so it's something of quality. That's what's most important to me. What about you? I know you're also writing.
Well, in fairness, just to peel back the covers a little bit, I've known Kristina for probably since 2019 now. I think we were introduced by a mutual friend, and you've been such a amazing part of my unfolding and my journey, and your consultation to help me has been really phenomenal. And I'd written a book in 2021. It was just a short little kind of piece. Decided to expand that, and I reached out to you and your partner was like, well, yeah, I'd love to help you, but I think Christina's writing a book that's the same topic. and I do think that is it is the case. I'm going to be it's going to excite me a lot to be able to read what you're writing and see. I think it's going to be a little bit of a Venn diagram, and there's probably going to be some overlap. I think we have a fundamentally similar model and approach. I think that your brain works differently than my brain, and what it's going to be. I really have two major goals: is to explain for me how psychedelics heal, a meta theory about how these substances are working that really comes from my teachers in Peru, but explains all the science and all the research and all the somatics and all the psychotherapeutic stuff that's happening. And if we just take a big enough step back and look at this from a more cosmic perspective, I want to share with people some of the teachings that have been so freely offered to me, and then a rubric, a framework for people who are new to the work. 12 steps for psychedelic success, to be perfectly honest with you. Like, it's I have a firm belief there is no one right way to psychedelics. And I think that recreational is absolutely a place where so much healing has occurred. And I also think that if you have bipolar type 2, or decide to drink a big cup of ayahuasca at a music festival, or you take 10 grams of mushrooms, like, there's bound to be things that are not great that are going to happen. So while there are opportunities in recreational settings, I think that we have to look at other variables to make sure that those settings or those experiences can be productive. And I am this book is leaning more into the seeking out a facilitator and preparing yourself for that work, understanding both the risks and the benefits, and seeing what happens. Not unlike you, I have pushed my launch date back because I want to spend more time creating something that is coming from a place of love, since that's really where you started as well. Love and care and compassion and a true desire for healing. So
Beautiful.
we'll see where, I can't wait to see where the streams cross.
I know. Yeah. What, I like that we're just keeping it really separate. And at some point when we've got our, ready manuscripts, we can read each other's. But I just think the more people with some experience and something to share here, writing and sharing and, because it's like what you share will resonate for some people and be a little support along their path, and hopefully mine will. And I don't know, I just find this work of consciousness exploration, and especially with, psychedelics, these powerful alchemical agents, just endlessly interesting and engaging. And I love reading what other people have to say about it and their experiences too. So can't wait to read your book.
Yeah, likewise.
Thanks.
So last thing, speed round, couple of questions.
Right.
You don't have to think about a whole lot, but why do you do this work?
Well, the work I'm doing right now is more in the teaching realm. I do, why am I working on teaching and in this realm of psychedelics? Because it's fun for me. Yeah, I actually find it really interesting and fun, and I love spending time with people that are doing this work from all different walks of life, and it's magical and it's powerful, and I've received personally so much healing. I haven't even gotten into that, but I've been through a lot, including advanced cancer in my 20s, and how the medicines helped me. So I'm also I'm not going to say indebted, but I have a deep, I would say kind of a sacred mutual indebtedness especially with the plant medicines it's just what this life is about for me.
Beautiful. What is the most important thing this work has taught you?
This work has taught me to be curious, to stay humble, to kind of, I guess, something about knowing my place in the world and the cosmos, that there are energies, including many of the master plant medicines, there are energies, sentiences that are way more powerful than I will ever be. And, teachers, great teachers, and benevolent forces, all kinds of forces, and to bow to them and learn from them. And I think it's to bow to something larger than myself. And that's a huge relief, because I don't really know anything.
What's the best advice you would give to a facilitator that is new on their path?
I think that one's easy. Have as much personal experience as you can. And whatever it is you want to be doing with others, you need to have done with yourself. For, you want to do one-on-one work, you need to have had one-on-one work. Just because you've done a lot of group ceremony does not make you ready to do one-on-one work. It's very different. And vice versa. So whatever it is you want to do a lot of it. Find really good teachers, find elders, find people, who carry these traditions in their family, these living lineages. Find them, lift them up, support their families, support their villages, support their places, give back. From whoever's giving you support and wisdom and teaching, give back, because we need wisdom holders and wisdom teachers. And I think just the last part I would add is stay curious. Don't think you know anything. Just be in inquiry. Stay in deep inquiry with yourself and others and the medicine, and see what unfolds.
My teachers just recently left the US, and one of the things that they continually told me is that the portal for the expansiveness that we can go to, like the unlimited, infinite expansiveness of this work, the portal is humility. And without that, we get stuck.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think pride is the most pernicious poison, thinking we know. So if we can cut its legs off just coming in with humility and reverence, the world opens, truly.
Yeah. If people wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I have a website. It's my name, ChristinaHunter.com. And I have a mailing list there. People could sign up and hear from me when the occasional newsletter thing that I share. So that's that. Or I have a contact form on my website and you can reach out to me. Those are the ways. And I'm pretty full with my work and writing. So, but always reach out. I feel like when there's a connection, I love to be in contact with people and communicate. So I welcome that.
Well, thank you so much for all of your beautiful gifts that you've shared with me, and now with all of these people listening to the podcast and those people that are going through your trainings and all of them. So thank you. And is there anything that we should have asked you today that we didn't?
Let's see. Wow. What am I really looking forward to doing this summer? I'm looking forward to swimming in swimming holes and getting out backpacking and camping and being out in the wilderness and sitting by the fire. It's just my absolute favorite thing to do in the summertime. So that's what I'm looking forward to. And thank you so much, GB. Great to spend some time with you here. Thank you for your wonderful questions and conversation.
You're very welcome. I wish you the most blissful summer by the campfire. So have a great afternoon.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Psychedelic IQ Podcast. If you resonated with this episode and are ready to go deeper into your personal work and practice, visit psychedelic-iq.com for more in-depth articles, books, training opportunities, and professionally organized psychedelic experiences hosted in both North and South America. And as always, you're perfect and you're right on time, and the path is wiser than the traveler.